The 10th time she came to my gate, I had already cut my son's grave. That is the first thing I will say, because it is the worst thing, and a man who buries the worst thing under the good ones is not confessing, he is arranging. The stone was cut. The name was cut into the stone. Ilmer Vale, and under it the year, and under that nothing, because there was nothing to say. He was 9 years old, and he had gone into the vale off the third weir on a wet Thursday, and by the 10th night the masons had finished, and I had gone down twice to look at the letters and come away both times without touching them. And she came to the gate, and I had her sent away. Understand what the vale is, or none of this will land the way it ought to. It is not a river the way you are thinking of a river. It is black, not dark black, the black of a shut room, and it runs fast under a surface that looks slow, and it takes. 2 years before my son it had taken 9 pups. 9. Fern Oddick's boy off the towpath, the twins from the low mill. The Haddo girl who could swim better than any grown wolf in my hold, who had been in and out of that water since she could walk, and who went in one summer evening and did not come out. Not one of the 9 was given back. That is the thing I want you to sit with. The vale does not return what it takes. It keeps. So we built a hold with its back to the water. Hallow Vale sluices and weirs and gray stone, a hold that lives off a river and does not look at it. We fished it with nets on long poles from the bank. We crossed it on the 3 bridges, and no wolf lingered on any of them. We told the pups, the water is not yours. We told them that from the day they could hear, and we told it hard, and it did not matter, because a river does not care what you have told your children. And every few months, a woman would come up the causeway from downstream with something in her hands. She was called Adeline Rusk. Her father had kept a sluice gate at 3 Weir before it silted and the pack moved on from it, and when he died she stayed, alone, in a stone house with the water at its door, and she made her living pulling things out of the vale. Timber mostly. Rope. Whatever the river had stolen from upstream and grown bored of, she sold it back to the people it had been stolen from. That was the whole of her trade and the whole of her standing. A scavenger of a river everyone else was afraid of, silt to the knee, hands cracked open with cold, a woman who smelled of black water and did not appear to notice. The first time she came, she brought a boot. I remember it exactly. She stood at my gate with a child's boot in both hands, held out flat, the way you would hold something you had been asked to carry and did not want to drop, and she said it had come out of the slack below the 4th weir, and she thought someone might know it. Fern Oddick knew it. Fern Oddick came out and looked at it and made a sound I have not been able to get out of my head in the 6 years since, and took the boot, and went back inside, and I stood in my own gateway with my hands at my sides, and said nothing whatever to the woman who had brought it. And then I told my gate guard to move her along. I want to be very accurate here, because there is a version of this where I am simply a hard man, and that version is more comfortable than the true one. I was not hard. I was afraid. Every time she came up that causeway with a boot, a collar, a name token, a child's belt buckle green with 2 years in the water, she was carrying my failure up the road in both hands and holding it out to me in front of my own people. She never said a word of accusation. Not once. She said this came out of the slack below the 4th weir, and I thought someone might know it. And that was all she ever said, and it was unbearable, and I made it stop the only way a king can make anything stop. 9 times. 9 times over 2 years she came, and 9 times I had her turned back before she reached the gate stones, and I told myself each time that I was sparing the hold, that the sight of her was cruelty, that every token she brought reopened a grave. There is a kind of decency you can wrap round a coward's decision and wear in public, and I wore it, and it fit. I never once asked her how she was getting into the water. Think about that. 9 pups had gone into the vale and not one had come out. No wolf in my hold would go past the shallows. I had made it law no one in the water, no one on the weirs, and I had put the law there out of pure terror and called it protection. And a woman with no pack, no rank, no wolf at her back was going into that river, month on month, year on year, and coming out again and coming up my causeway with what she had found, and I never asked her how. I did not want to know. If she could do it, then it could be done. And if it could be done, then the 9 were not lost to a river. They were lost to a king who would not go in after them. So I turned her away, and I did not ask, and the masons were kept busy. On the wet Thursday, my son went into the water. I was in the council room arguing about grain. That is the shape of it. There was no omen. The rain had been coming down 4 days, and the veil was up and brown-black at the edges and loud, and Ilmer was 9, and 9-year-olds have been told the water is not there so many times that the telling has worn smooth and stopped meaning anything at all. He was on the 3rd weir with 2 other boys. There was a dare in it, I think. I have never asked. The other 2 came home. They got the alarm to me before the sound had finished going round the hold. I came out of the council room with the grain still in my mouth, and I ran. And I remember my crown was on, and I remember taking it off and dropping it on the wet stones somewhere on the causeway, and I have never found out who picked it up. And I went down the bank to the 3rd weir where 40 of my people were standing. Standing, all of them, standing on the bank of a river with a child in it. And I stood with them. You want me to say I went in? You have got, by now, some picture of a king, and in that picture he throws off the fur and he goes into the black water after his son, and they haul him out half dead, and it is a great and terrible thing, and at least he went in. I stood on the bank. I stood on the bank of the vale for 6 hours while my people put nets on poles into water that took them and would not give them back, and I gave orders, good orders, sensible orders, orders about ropes and lanterns and where to search along the bank downstream, and every single one of those orders was a way of not being in the water. And when the light went, I gave the order to stop, because it was not safe, and that was also true, and being true is how a thing like that gets said out loud. I have gone over it since. I have gone over it in the small hours of I could not tell you how many nights, and the truth, the real one, the one under the sensible orders, is this. I did not go in because I did not know what was in there. 9 pups had gone into that water and none had come back, and I did not know why, and I would not put myself into a thing I could not read. Not for grain, not for war, not for my son. I was the Alpha King of Hallow Vale, and I had made a law against the river because I could not read the river, and my son died inside my law. By the 2nd day, we were searching the banks for a body. By the 3rd day, we were searching them from habit. On the 4th day, I sent for the masons. I want you to know that I did that in a perfectly steady voice. I said the name, and I said the year, and I said no more than that on the stone, and the mason asked, carefully, whether I would like a wolf carved, and I said no, and he went away and cut it. 4 days. I gave my son 4 days, and then I gave him a slab of granite, and I did it because I could not bear the not knowing for 1 hour longer, and a grave is a thing you can know. That was the 10th night. That was the night she came. She came up the causeway in the rain, a little after dark, and my gate guard came and told me, and I said, without looking up from the table, no. That is all. That is the entire scene. There is no confrontation in it, no shouting, no scene for a story. A man at a table with his hands flat on it said no to a name, and a guard went out into the rain and said not tonight to a woman standing in it, and she went away. My gate guard's name is Bren Harrow, and he has been on that gate for 19 years, and he came back in afterwards, which was not his habit, and he stood in the doorway with the rain coming off him, and he did not say anything at all. He just stood there, and I looked up eventually and said what, in a voice I am not proud of, and he said, she wasn't carrying anything, my king. And I said, then what did she want? And Bren Harrow said, she didn't want anything. She just looked at the water and went back down. I said nothing. I sat at that table with my hands flat on it, and I let a man who had been at my gate for 19 years stand in my doorway dripping, until he understood he was not going to be answered, and then he went out. She had not come to the gate to be let in. She had come to tell me she was going in after him, and I would not see her, so she went and did it anyway. Here is what she knew. I did not learn it that night. I learned it afterwards in pieces over months out of a woman who explained things exactly as often as she was asked and not one word more. And the shame of the learning is a thing I have simply had to carry. The veil does not keep what it takes, it sorts it. The channel between the third weir and the fourth runs deep and hard, and it drives everything to the near bank, where the stone shelves out under the water and there is a hollow beneath it. And in that hollow, the current turns back on itself and lies almost still. Slack water, a pocket of quiet at the bottom of a black river, and everything the veil carries down that channel goes into it and stays there, turning slowly out of the light for as long as the river holds its level. Everything, the timber she sold, the rope, the boot, the buckle, the collar with a pup's name scratched into the tin. She had not been finding them scattered along 4 miles of bank like a scavenger. She had been going to one place, again and again, for 6 years, because she had worked out where the river put things, and the reason no one else in Hallow Vale knew that the slack was there was that no one else in Hallow Vale had ever been under the water to look, because I had made a law. And the cold. She told me this last, and she told it plainly, with her hands round a cup, as though it were a fact about weather. The veil comes down off the high shale, and it is cold in a way that ordinary water is not, cold enough that a body that goes into it stops. Not dies. Stops. The heart slows down to almost nothing, and the blood goes to the middle, and the whole of a person shuts like a house shutting for winter. And in that state a body will keep, in the way that a thing kept in a cold cellar will keep, for far, far longer than any of us had ever thought a drowned child could keep. She had found this out on a dog. That is the truth, and I will not dress it. 11 years ago, when she was a girl, a dog went into the vale off the three-weir sluice, and she pulled it out an hour later, cold and stiff and gone. And she carried it into her father's house and put it by the fire because she was a child and she could not think what else to do. And after a long time in the warmth, the dog breathed. And Adeline Rusk, aged 12, in a sluice-keeper's cottage with a dead dog breathing on her hearth, understood a thing about the river that the Alpha King of Hallow Vale did not understand at 38. She had spent 11 years since then learning how far it went, how long, how cold, which parts of the channel drove into the slack and which drove past it, where the shelf was and how far under, and how you got beneath it and out again on one breath, and how you did it in the dark, and what the river did when it was up in the rain and what it did when it was down. She had made a map of the vale out of everything the vale gave back, and she had made it alone, and it was in her head, and there was not a soul in the hold who had ever asked her a question about it. She had come to my gate 10 times. The first 9, she had come to bring back what belonged to us, and, I think now, to be asked. To have some man in a doorway look at the boot in her hands and say, "How did you find this?" and open the gate. The 10th, she came because my son had been in the cold 4 days, and 4 days was inside what she knew the veil would allow, and she had come to tell me that there was still time. And I said no. The 4th weir at night in a rain flood is not a place a person should be, and I have stood on it since, in daylight, in a dry month, and had to put my hand on the rail. She went in from the near bank, where the shelf begins, and she went down along the stone with the current shoving her flat against it, and she went under the lip. I have made her describe it 3 times. She does it the way she does everything, evenly, without ornament, faintly puzzled at being asked. She says the sound goes. That is the first thing. Above the water, the veil and flood is a roar you have to shout through, and under it there is nothing, not silence, but a kind of pressure where the sound was. She says the cold comes in at the back of the neck first. She says you do not open your eyes because there is nothing to see and the grit will blind you, and you go by the stone under your hands, and the shelf runs about 11 feet before it turns, and at the turn you put your legs down and you are in the slack, and the water stops pulling, all at once, and it is like walking into a room. She had been into that room perhaps 40 times in 11 years. And that night, in the dark, under a river in flood, 4 days after my son went off the third weir. She put out her hands in the slack water beneath the fourth weir and found him. I was asleep when they brought him up. I want that on the stone if anything of me is ever put on one. Not the grain, not the wars, not the sluices I rebuilt or the 2 hard winters I brought the hold through without a death. Put this, he was asleep. It was Bryn Harrow who woke me, and he did it by putting his hand on my shoulder, which is a thing no man in that hold had ever done, and when I came up out of it swinging he did not let go. He said my name, not my title, my name twice until I stopped. And then he said, "She's on the gate stones. She's got the boy." I said, and this is exactly what I said. I have never lied about it. I said, "Tell the mason to wait until morning." Because I thought she had brought me a body. I thought that woman had gone into the black water and pulled my son's corpse out of it and carried him up my causeway to lay him at my feet. And I thought, God help me. I thought, there is my grave filled then, and I thought about the letters on the stone, and I did not get up. And Bryn Harrow, who has been on my gate for 19 years, said, "My king, he's breathing." I do not remember the stairs. I remember the gate stones. It had stopped raining and the whole of Hallow Vale was awake and out. I do not know how, I have never known how, the hold simply knew, and they had made a ring, 200 people in the dark with lanterns, and in the middle of it, on the wet granite of my own threshold, my son was lying on his side. He was gray. He was the color of the river. He was not moving, and his lips were the wrong color entirely, and if you had shown him to me in that state and asked me, I would have said he was 4 days dead, and I would have staked the hold on it. And his chest was going, small, very slow, perhaps 6 times in a minute, and each one so shallow you had to be looking for it, and once you had seen it you could not see anything else in the world. She was kneeling beside him, with her hands on his ribs. She was black to the shoulder with silt, and her hair was flat to her skull, and she was shaking so hard that her teeth were audible in that ring of 200 silent people. And she had put her own coat over him, and she was kneeling on my gate stones in the cold in her shirt, and she did not look up when I came out. She said, "Get him warm slowly." That was the first thing she ever said to me. Not, "Here is your son," not, "You sent me away." 9 tokens up that causeway and 10 refusals and a night under a flooded river, and what she said to the Alpha King of Hallow Vale without looking up was an instruction about how to warm a child. "Slowly," she said again, "not the fire, not straight to the fire, he'll die. Blankets, bodies, somebody warm on each side of him and keep them there and don't hurry it." And I said, "I am told," I said, "I have no memory of it." I said, "How long?" And she said, "Hours, days maybe. He'll come up like a man coming up a well." And then she stood and swayed, and Bryn Harrow caught her elbow, and she took her hand back off my son's ribs and she went to go. She was going. That is the thing that finally broke the man I had been for 6 years. Not the boy on the stones, not the breathing. I could have survived those. I could have made those into a Mercy of the Moon and a grand story about my house. It was that she straightened up off her knees, in her wet shirt, in front of 200 people, and turned to go back down the causeway to 3 weir, and it had plainly not entered her head that anything else was going to happen. She had done it. He was breathing. That was the end of her business at my gate. She had not come for a place at my table. She had not come to be raised or thanked or seen. She had come 10 times because there was a river and there were children in it, and there was one living soul in Hallow Vale who could read the water, and she had gone on coming to a gate that shut in her face because the coming was the right thing, and she did not require it to be answered. And I had spent 2 years calling that woman a scavenger. I got in front of her. I do not know what my face was doing. Bryn Harrow has told me since that the ring of people went back a step, all of it, all at once, the way a crowd does when a king moves, and she did not. She stopped, because I was in the way, and she looked up at me with the rain-black water still running out of her hair, and she waited to be moved along. She thought I was going to have her moved along. I went down on my knees on the wet granite in front of her. There is no dignified way to describe it, and I have stopped trying to find one. A king in his shirt at 3 in the morning, on his own threshold, in front of 200 of his people, went down onto both knees in the water on the stones and stayed there. The sound that went round that ring was not a cheer and it was not a gasp. It was a kind of intake, 200 people taking a breath at the same moment and not letting it out, and then nothing at all. Nobody moved. Bren Harrow told me afterwards that he thought I had collapsed. He said he took a step towards me and then understood and stopped, and that his understanding arrived in his chest like being struck. Adeline Rusk looked down at me and said, "Get up." Not softly, not gently. She said it the way you would say it to a man lying in a road with real alarm in it, and she put her hand out, actually put her hand out to haul me up, a sluice keeper's daughter reaching down to lift her king off the floor, and I did not take it. I said 9 times. She let her hand fall. 9 times you came up this causeway, I said, and I had you turn back at that gate, and I never once asked you how you were finding them. The whole hold heard it. I made certain the whole hold heard it. If a man is going to say a thing like that, he says it once, out loud, in front of everyone who ought to hear it, or he does not say it at all, and he calls that discretion. I made a law against the water, I said, because I was frightened of it, and I called it protection, and 9 pups went into the veil inside my law, and my son went in inside my law, and you have been going in after all of them for 6 years on your own, and I turned you away at my gate because I could not bear to look at you. She stood there in her wet shirt with the silt drying gray on her arms, and she did not say a word, and I understood, kneeling there, that she was not going to help me with this. She was not going to say it doesn't matter, my king, or you did what you could. She had never once in 10 visits told me a comfortable thing, and she was not about to start because I had put myself on the ground. Teach me the river, I said. That got her. I saw it get her, a flinch, quick, gone again, the first thing I had ever seen move on that face. Not for me, I said. Not to make this right, because it does not go right. Teach me the river so that the next time a child goes off the 3rd weir there is a hold full of wolves who know where the slack is, instead of 40 of them standing on the bank, with nets on poles while their king gives sensible orders. And I said, and this was the hardest of it, and my voice did what it did in front of 200 people, and I let it. Fern Oddick's boy is still down there. The twins, the Haddo girl, they're in the slack, aren't they? Adeline Rusk was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, some of them. And in the ring of lanterns behind me, somewhere near the back, Fern Oddick made that sound again. The one I had first heard 6 years ago in my own gateway over a child's boot. And this time, I did not stand in my doorway with my hands at my sides and say nothing at all. She stayed that night because I asked her to, and she asked for nothing while she stayed, and both of those facts are the whole of her. They put my son in the long hall on blankets with the fire built up at the far end, and 2 of the kitchen women lying against him, 1 on each side, and their arms round him, and the whole hold going in and out on tiptoe like people in a sick room, which it was. And Adeline sat on the floor beside him with her back against a bench and her knees up, and she watched his chest. And every hour or so she reached over and put 2 fingers against his throat and counted, and put her hand back down and said nothing. I sat on the other side of him. Neither of us slept. Some time before dawn I said, "Tell me about the cold," and she told me evenly with her eyes on the boy, the shale, the stopping, the house shut for winter, the dog on her father's hearth when she was 12. She told it the way another woman might tell you how to bank a fire, and at the end of it I said, "You have known this for 11 years. Yes. And you never told anyone." And she looked at me then for the first time directly across my son's gray face, and she said, without heat, which was worse than heat, "I came up your causeway 10 times. I had nothing, there is nothing. I sat on the floor of my own hall and took it. He came up like she said he would, like a man coming up a well. Around noon of the next day, the breathing changed, deepened, unevened, caught, and his hand moved. And one of the kitchen women started crying and could not stop. And by the evening he was warm to the touch and shivering so violently the blankets shook, which Adeline said was the best sound in the room. And in the night he opened his eyes and looked at the ceiling of the long hall for a while as though he did not think much of it. And then he said, quite clearly, that he was thirsty. I have been in 3 wars. I have taken this hold through a winter that killed 200 of my people, and I have stood on a field at the end of a bad day and given the orders you have to give. I have never in my life been undone by anything the way I was undone by my son asking, in a cross voice, for a drink of water. And Adeline Rusk stood up from the floor and stretched her back and said, "There, he'll do." And she picked up her coat and went to go home. I did not stop her. I had learned that much in a day and a night. But I walked down the causeway with her, alone in the morning, all 4 miles to weir in the rain, and I have never had a conversation like it before or since. She did not talk. I did not feel it. We went down the towpath with the black water running along beside us, and every so often she would stop and look at it, and say something like, "That's a sinkhole. Under that, anything goes in there comes out at the bend," or "This is where the Haddo girl went in," and she'd have gone past the shelf. The river was low, and then she would walk on, and I would stand for a moment where she had stopped, looking at a piece of black water that had been running past my whole life, and that I had never once looked at. 4 miles, perhaps 20 sentences. It was the most useful morning of my reign. At her door I said, "Come back." And she said, "For what?" And I said, "For the same reason you came the other 10 times. She thought about that honestly, standing in her doorway with the veil at the end of her yard. And then she said, "All right," and went inside and shut the door, and that was the entire ceremony. She came back on a Tuesday with a rope over her shoulder and did not knock. Bren Harrow had the gate open before she was halfway up the causeway, and he has told me since that he had had it standing open every day since the boy came up, on his own authority, and that if I had said one word to him about it, he had a 19-year speech prepared. I never said the word. That gate has not been shut on her since, and it will not be shut on her while I am alive to keep it open, and when I am not, Ilmer will keep it open, and he knows why. She took 11 of us into the water that first summer. I was one of them. I want to be plain that this was not a grand gesture. It was 3 months of a grown king being taught to swim, badly, in front of his own people, by a woman 4 inches shorter than his shoulder who had no patience whatsoever with the concept of a king. She stood on the bank in the shallows at weir where the water is brown and slow and safe, and she said things like "No," and again, "And you're fighting it, don't fight it. It's stronger than you are and it always will be." And I went under a great many times and came up spitting silt, and my people watched, and I let them watch. That was the point. If they were going to go into the Vale, they had to see the man who had made the law against it get in first and get it wrong. She taught us the channel. She taught us the shelf and the 11 feet and the turn and the room in the dark at the end of it. She taught us to go in from the near bank and never the far, and how to read the level off the sluice boards, and what the river does when the rain has been on the high shale for 3 days, and what it does when it has not. She made us learn the cold, not to fear it, to use it, that a body pulled out gray and gone is not gone, that you warm it slowly, that you put living bodies against it, that you do not put it near the fire. She made every wolf in that hold learn that last part until they could say it in their sleep. Because, as she pointed out, in the flat way she pointed out everything, it is not much use knowing where the slack is if you pull a child out of it and then kill him on the hearth in front of his mother. And in the 2nd week of that first summer, 4 of us went under the 4th weir with rope and a lantern that was no use at all, and we brought up Fern Oddick's boy. What was left? It was 6 years. I will not describe it, and there is no need. But it was him, and we knew it was him, and we brought him up out of the black water and carried him to his mother, and she buried him in the ground with a stone over him and his name on it, and she can go and stand there now. She has, I have seen her. She goes on the day every year and she stands there for a while, and then she goes home. The twins were not there. The river had taken them past. But the Haddo girl was, and a boy from before my time whose name we have never established, and we brought both of them up, and we gave them ground and stone, and the hold came out for every one of them. 9 pups had gone into that river in 2 years. We got 4 of them back out. 4 out of 9, 6 years too late, because a king was afraid of the water and it never occurred to him to ask the only person who wasn't. 4 is not 9. 4 is what my cowardice left on the table. I have not once in the years since allowed anyone in my hearing to describe those 4 as a triumph. Ilmer is 19 now. He does not remember the slack. He remembers the 3rd weir and the rain and going in, and then he remembers being thirsty in the long hall, and between those 2 things there is nothing at all, and he is quite untroubled by that, in the way of a young man who has decided that a thing which happened to him at 9 has nothing to do with the man he is at 19. He is on the sluice boards most days. He is very good, better than I ever was, better than most, and he has the river in his hands the way some men have a horse. He and Adeline argue about the 4th weir constantly and at length. He thinks the shelf is undercutting and the whole lip will go in 10 years. She thinks he is a child who has read the level twice and believes he has read it forever. They stand out on the boards in the wind shouting at each other about stone, and I stand at the window of my hall and watch them, and I am not a man who is easily made happy, and that makes me happy. She lives in the hold now. She has done for a long time. That happened the way everything with her happens, which is to say with no announcement of any kind. She was simply there more often than she was at 3 weir, and then one winter she did not go back, and Bren Harrow put her things in a room near the water stair without asking anybody, and if there was a moment at which it changed, I did not witness it. The bond, because you have been waiting for me to name it, and I have made you wait, and that was not an accident, did not arrive on the gate stones. I have thought about this a great deal, and I want to be exact, because I owe her exactness if I owe her nothing else. It did not come when she knelt over my son with her hands on his ribs. It did not come when she pulled him out of the black water, which is when it ought to have come, if these things ran on gratitude. It did not even come on the causeway in the rain. It came in the shallows at 3 weir in the 2nd month of that first summer, when she told me to go under, and I did, and came up, and she said, "Again." And I understood, standing chest deep in the vale with the silt in my eyes, that she was not going to make it easy for me, and she never had and she never would, and that this was the only thing anyone had ever offered me that was not a bow. I had been Alpha King of Hallow Vale for 11 years, and every soul in it agreed with me. Everyone. My council agreed with me, my captains agreed with me. My own gate guard stood in my doorway dripping and could not say the sentence. 9 pups drowned inside a law that I made out of fear, and not one person in my hold ever came and stood in front of me and said your law is fear, and it is killing our children. She never said it either. She did something harder. She went on coming. And in the water that morning she said again to me, in the tone you would use to any man who had gone under badly, and there was no king in her voice at all, and something in the middle of my chest, something that had been braced for 11 years, some stone I had been standing on and calling it firm ground, went out from under me. Not stillness, not a rising, it was the floor going. It was the exact sensation of the shelf turning under your hands at 11 feet when you have been feeling your way along stone in the dark, and there is suddenly nothing, and you go down, and you find that the nothing is a room and that you can stand up in it. That is what she did to me. She took the ground away, and the falling was the safest I have ever been. I did not tell her that for 2 years. When I finally did, she listened all the way through, standing at the window with her arms folded, and then she said, and went out to look at the boards. We were married in the spring, in the yard, in the rain, because it is always raining, and she wore a gray dress, and her hands were cracked open with cold as they have been every day of her life, and I have never seen anything in this world I wanted to hold more. There was no crowning. She would not have it. The council wanted a crowning and a proclamation and a great deal of business with a cloak, and she heard them out with the flat, unhurried patience she brings to all foolishness, and then she said that she did not require the hold to be told anything it could see for itself, and that she had a sluice to look at. So there is no crown on her. There is a gate that stands open, and a hold where every wolf over the age of 8 can swim, and a stone at the 4th weir with 4 names on it, and a law, the only law I have made since, that says the water is ours, and it is dangerous, and you will learn it. And there is a slab of granite in the mason's yard with my son's name cut into it, and the year under that, and nothing under that, and I have never had it broken up. It stands against the wall where the offcuts go, and it has been there 10 years, and the moss is getting into the letters. Ilmer knows it is there. He goes and looks at it sometimes. He has never asked me to get rid of it, and I have never offered, and I think we understand each other about it. Because a man who buries the worst thing under the good ones is not confessing. He is arranging. I sent her away 9 times. She came back on the 10th without being asked, and went into a river I had made a law against, and she has never once, not in the yard, not in the hall, not in 11 years of arguing about stone with my son on the sluice boards, she has never once held it over me. I hold it over myself, every day. That is the arrangement, and it is a fair one, and I would not have it altered. She has never asked me why I kneel on the gate stones on the 10th night of every autumn. I think she knows. I think she has always known, the way she knows what the river will do when the rain has been 3 days on the high shale, not because anyone told her, but because she looked at the thing everyone else was too frightened to look at, and she went on looking, and she did not require it to look back. But she has never asked. And I have never got up before she comes out with a coat and puts it round my shoulders and stands there, saying nothing whatever, until I am ready.